So further ado, I'm just going to introduce Chris, who's here with us. Chris Nasty is the Assistant Director of Fitness and Wellness Programs. Chris has been with us with AU's team since about August of 2015, and he oversees fitness and wellness programming and fitness center operations for Recreational Sports and Fitness Center. And then Bob Beam is our fitness facilities coordinator, and he's been with us since January 2017, and he assists the team in overseeing some of our fitness facilities. So I'm going to leave it on to them. Most of you are going to be muted in this session, so if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat section, and Chris will address them as they move along in the presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much for that introduction, and thanks everybody for joining this this session. Give you guys a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to take about 10 minutes or so to just give a big overview of what muscle imbalances are, and then a little bit on kind of big picture how fitness professionals address muscle imbalances. So that'll be about 10 minutes or so. Then what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're actually going to go through 4 stretches and 4 strength exercises. So when we get to that point, we're certainly going to invite everybody who's comfortable to join us. The stretches will be really low intensity. There'll be things, 2 of them you can do seated, 2 of them will be standing stretches. And when we get to the strength exercises, again, 3 of them will be really easy to do. 1 of them will require, if you want to follow along, to get down on the ground. So if you just want to watch that one, that's totally cool. But like we said, if you do have specific questions, definitely drop them in the chat, and we'll be happy to address them. So I'm going to go ahead and actually kick over to Bob just to say hello.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I've been working for AU since January 2017, working under Chris, and at first, I started off as the personal training coordinator, and I slowly got moved into more fitness facilities, but I still do personal training. I'm also a student at AU, studying in the MBA program, which I hopefully will be graduating this spring. So very excited to not only be working at AU, but also be a student, and I'm happy to be here today and teach you guys some strategies to correct some muscle imbalances since we've been working remotely for the last few months.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So I should have just shared my screen with everybody. So here's our quick agenda. We've already covered that. The one other thing is at the very end, Bob's going to take me through a sample movement assessment, but we'll get to that at the end. So the big question, what is a muscle imbalance? You know, we're here talking about, folks, we're all at home now, or most of us are working from home. Even before all this started, we probably all had a lot of time we were sitting at our desks. For a lot of us, during these last couple months, we've maybe had even more time that we're sitting at our desk. And so when you're doing that, when you're in any kind of position where you're holding the same kind of position for a long time, or you're doing really repetitive movements, you put your body at a little bit higher risk of a muscle imbalance. So what a muscle imbalance is broadly, and the type that we're going to be talking about today, is a combination of 2 antagonistic muscles. So I'll use the example of a bicep and a tricep, the muscles on the front and back of your arm. A muscle imbalance occurs when some combination of one of those muscles is too tight, and then the opposite muscle is too weak. So some examples that are a little bit more common for folks that are sitting at a desk for long periods of time are things that we might normally refer to as, we might normally think of them as just bad posture. So examples could be a forward head posture, where if you're sitting at your desk, your head is a little bit, more forward than it should be with what we would think of as good posture. Forward shoulders, where your shoulders are forward or rounded, or even something like where your shoulders are elevated. So those are a couple examples of things, and we'll get into them in a little bit more depth. But like you can see in that little picture, it's that combination of one muscle group being too tight and that opposite muscle group being too weak. So what this whole presentation is going to be about is identifying those and then teaching you a few very specific strategies for addressing those muscle imbalances, or just doing a little bit of preemptive work. Again, if we are sitting quite a bit, that can help us maybe stave off those potential imbalances. So how do they develop? For us, for most of us, probably that biggest risk is that third one on the list, holding a position for too long. So most of us, even with the best intentions, may not be sitting at our desk with perfect posture. We're not going to talk a lot about ergonomics today. Leanne has a great presentation on that, so we'll be sure to share that. But if you're holding a position for an extended period of time where you're not in that kind of perfect position, you can start to contribute to a muscle imbalance. Overuse is another way. So an example from like an exercise perspective, if somebody was doing a certain type of exercise a lot and not training the opposite muscle group, they could develop a particular muscle imbalance. One type of example of that would be if you were doing just work for your core or your abs on the front of your core, but not doing the corresponding back work, you could over time develop a type of overuse imbalance. And then injury. So any acute injury could also potentially lead to a muscle imbalance. But we're really gonna be focused on those second two. So what's actually happening? What is happening with these muscle imbalances? Again, that little picture down there shows kind of our bicep and tricep example. But two things are happening simultaneously. So if we're using the bicep and tricep as our example, the tight muscle, and in this example, we'll pretend the bicep is the tight muscle. What's happening is that tight muscle could be overactive. So when our muscles contract, if we wanted to kind of flex our arm, basically our brain and our nerves are sending signals to those muscles to contract. So in this case, the bicep, if we wanted to flex our arm, we would be sending signals to that bicep muscle to contract. But if somebody has a muscle imbalance, what could be happening is that muscle could be overactive. And so basically the muscle fibers are firing when we don't want them to. And that's one of those contributors to a muscle imbalance. And then the flip side of that is whenever we have one muscle group that's actively contracting, our body is sending a signal to that opposite muscle group. So when we purposely flex our bicep, we're telling our tricep to relax. But if our bicep muscles are flexing on their own, they're kind of having that activity we don't want them to be doing, they're going to be sending that signal to the tricep to relax. So our tricep is going to be potentially a little bit weaker just because of this, normal process of happening. So now the bicep tricep imbalance, that one's really rare, but we are going to go into a couple others that are a lot more common. And so I think we're going to flip things over to Bob now to walk us through how do we actually treat muscle imbalances. Whoops, one more slide for me, sorry. Why care about this? I guess that's pretty important. Well, here's why you should care about it. It's not just that you've got bad posture. I know when I was growing up, my mom would always say, hey, you got bad posture, you just gotta think about standing up straighter. But just thinking about standing up straighter, that's a hard way to correct bad posture, correct a muscle imbalance. Actually addressing the issue, so if we're looking at maybe forward shoulders, that's an example of the chest muscles being too tight and those back muscles maybe being a little bit too weak. So using this, what we're gonna talk about, we can help address just the natural position. So you don't have to think about sitting up in good posture. Your body just naturally falls into this. We care about it because over time, muscle imbalances just naturally make themselves worse by the nature of the muscle imbalance if we don't treat it. Another issue with muscle imbalances is our entire body is connected. And so what could start as one muscle imbalance in one joint could over time start to affect other joints. And then we create some really weird combinations of muscle imbalances. And then finally, if those are left untreated over a long period of time, those could start to contribute to unnecessary joint damage. And just over time, they become harder and harder to treat. So that is why we should care about these. So now, we'll kick this over to Bob.
All right, thanks, Chris. So hopefully now that you guys understand a little bit about muscle imbalances, I want to take you through some different stages we use in order to correct those muscle imbalances. So we're going to get into assessments and how we identify which muscle imbalances are specific to you. We're going to just run through what we would do once we identify those muscle imbalances. So NASM, one of the curriculums we use to teach our students personal training, has a great corrective exercise specialist certificate that they offer. And so I'm going to take you through what they recommend as far as muscle imbalances. So there's 4 different stages, those being inhibit, lengthen, activate, and integrate. And I'll take you through each of those stages a little more in depth. And what I will also do is one of the most common kind of overuse we see for sitting all day is we have tight hip flexors. So I'll take you through kind of what those exercises would look like if we were fixing that muscle imbalance. So the first one, inhibit, as you can see here, is the main kind of aspect to this stage is self-myofascial release techniques. Most of the time you think of foam rolling. There's percussion devices out there that you can buy, any type of manual techniques, such as one technique called Graston, or even just going to a massage therapist is basically doing this first stage of inhibiting the muscle, which helps with reducing your muscle tension, relieve muscle soreness, and improve circulation within the muscle. And again, you're looking for areas that are tender and that muscle tissue is a little tight. So those develop as a result of microtraumas and stress to that soft tissue. Whenever you're doing any type of self-myofascial release, you want to make sure that you're relaxing and not tensing up. That's going to help get the most benefit out of this stage. Like I said earlier, there's different tools you can use. The J hooks for getting a spot in your back, foam rollers, lacrosse balls, any type of those percussion vibration devices, even those handheld rollers, all are forms of this inhibit stage whenever you feel like a muscle is tense. And this is something that you can do daily. Typically the most benefit is if when you find that tender spot, you want to hold for about 30 to 90 seconds and until you feel that tension kind of slowly disappear. And that's how we're really breaking down those adhesions and those knots within the muscle. So if we're looking at someone who has tight hip flexors, the first kind of foam rolling or percussion devices or massage therapy would be the calves or the hip flexor complex, being your front of your thigh, or if you're a runner, sometimes that IT band on the side of your hip gets really tight. So those would be some areas that we'd want to do some inhibiting with. All right, so moving on to the next stage, lengthen. So pretty much lengthen is static stretching or any kind of form of stretching. So when we're doing our assessments, we'll look for muscles that are overactive, and those are the ones that we'll want to focus on. Static stretching helps with reducing stiffness, increasing range of motion, and improving your posture. The main reason is, once we've kind of allowed those elasticity of the muscles, we've broken those down with our inhibiting stage. Now we want to lengthen those. So we want that stretching primarily used to increase the availability and range of motion within that joint we're working with. And that's going to help with overall activities of daily living and how we move around. Again, stretching is something you can do daily. Most benefit out of stretching is holding for 20 to 30 seconds to really get the most out of the stretch. Typically, research studies show that after 30 seconds, there's really no more returns, but at least a 30-second hold. For some people, that might be a lot, especially if you're really tight. So, what I recommend to my clients, if 30 seconds is too much, is just start with 5 or 10 seconds, and then next week try to add another 5 seconds until you're able to hold that complete 30 seconds for the stretch. So again, working with someone who might have tight hip flexors, we foam roll those specific muscles, and then you just want to stretch those specific muscles. So you're just going from foam rolling the muscle to stretching like the calf, or stretching the hip flexor complex, stretching those muscles out and getting the full range of motion. The third stage, activate. So now that we have complete elasticity in our muscles, we have full range of motion, Activate is really looking and identifying what muscles are underactive or what we call weak muscles and strengthening those. So we use a form of more isolated exercises to really target those muscles that need to get stronger, which help with improving muscle endurance, increasing strength. Again, the whole rationale for this isolated strengthening stage is to increase force production through those muscles. But the main thing is to avoid the use of synergist muscles. And I'm trying to keep my lecture here basic terminology, but synergist muscles basically means secondary muscles that aren't meant to take the full amount of force. So for sitting all day, we lose a lot of glute activation, those main muscles, and then our piriformis, which is our synergist muscle, starts to take over. And Chris is going to show you a little bit later how to focus on the glutes. But when those synergist muscles take over because we have weak dominant muscles, we start to develop these muscle imbalances because they're not meant for that much use. You don't have to do these daily. Typically, a strength training can be about 3 to 5 days for these isometric exercises. 1 to 2 sets, 10 to 15 repetitions. Maybe start with 10, slowly build your way up to 15. At the contraction or at the squeeze of the muscle, typically you might want to hold for 2 seconds to really work on getting that mind-muscle connection and getting the muscle stronger. So for activation exercises for someone who has tight hip flexors from sitting all day, Chris will show you the glute bridge. We can do some core stabilizers as well, really isolating the core and getting that stronger so that when we sit, we have more of a stronger core, more upright core. And then the last stage here, this 4th stage, which is integrate, it really ties just everything together. So we've allowed for full range of motion. We've targeted the specific muscle we want to get stronger. And now we work on overall full body dynamic movements to really help coordinate muscle patterns. So we're reteaching that functional movement. The purpose of this stage is dynamic multi-joint total body movements, improve body coordination, improve more movement patterns, and enhance your performance. And the reason this is important is because we lose mobility throughout our lifespan. So if anyone who has young kids or young cousins like myself, you'll see them squat down all the way and hold that position and play with the rocks or anything. And so as we age and as we live this sedentary lifestyle that unfortunately we have, driving to work, sitting down all day, we lose those basic movement patterns. So we're trying to rebuild all the way up to those full movement patterns and then really work on those dynamics to help out and retain that movement throughout the lifespan. So those are the 4 stages. Again, you can focus on the first 2 and then you can work on stage 3 and 4 as you get kind of more of the tension and you're feeling more loose and ready to go. But typically as a trainer, I'll take my clients throughout those stages slowly and progress them until they feel like they're at their peak performance or able to perform specific activities of daily living that they're trying to do, whether that's just bending down and picking up grandchildren, things like that. So it applies to not only athletes, but all the way to individuals who just need to do activities of daily living. So like I said, Chris is going to take us through some exercises that we can practice for specific muscle imbalances that we might see during an assessment.
All right, thanks so much, Bob. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 of those concepts that Bob talked about and show how you can put them into practice. Now, for that stage 1, the inhibit, that's great, and it's something that if you've got the tools to do, absolutely start with. We're going to skip over that only because that not everybody's going to have the same tools to do that, and we're going to move on to that stage 2, which is lengthen. Now, it's very important to know if you don't have a foam roller or don't have anything to do that inhibit stage, you're still going to get a lot of benefit if you're starting in stage 2 and starting with the lengthening. But if you have those tools, definitely use them. So one of the most common muscle imbalances is something that we refer to as lower cross syndrome. It's a combination of a couple things, but what this could look like is an arch in the lower back, and I'm still sharing my screen right now. You can see this person on the screen. everybody has, if they have good posture, should have a small curve in their lower back. But if that curve starts to become excessive, that's where that posture starts to break down. And this is really, caused primarily by really overactive or tight hip flexors. If you think about, if you're sitting down right now, your hip flexors are, they're flexed. And they're flexed more than they normally should be if we were standing. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you guys can see me a little bit better. Give me 1 second to do that. And I'm gonna pin my video. 1 second. All right. So if you only see me in the little tiny square, you can make me a little bit bigger by going up to the corner and doing speaker view. But I'm gonna pop up and just show you guys, and feel free to follow along or just watch. You're gonna need for these first 2 stretches just a little bit of space. Move. You still see me okay? There you go. All right, so I wanna show you guys 2 stretches. The first one is going to be a hip flexor stretch. So let me adjust this camera a little bit. A hip flexor stretch, our hip flexors are muscles that are right here. So they basically allow us to do that movement. And so to stretch them, we're gonna do the opposite of that. So one way to do this is give yourself a little bit of room. You need a couple feet in front and back. You're gonna take a little step forward and you're gonna take a step back. So you're gonna be in a lunge position. I'm gonna adjust my camera just a little bit. You're gonna be in a lunge position. So 1 foot's forward, 1 foot's back, and we're gonna bend that front knee, trying to keep our hips pointed straight forward, and we're gonna drop down and just go just as far as is comfortable. If you've got a wall or a chair next to you, you can hold on to that for balance, or a made up changing table. And we wanna feel the stretch right here. Now, if you're tight, you might feel that in different spots. Remember, all of your muscles are attached through the kinetic chain. But again, keep those hips pointed straight forward. Now, when we're doing static stretches, ideally, we want to hold them for about 20 to 30 seconds. We might not hold them for quite that long for the presentation, but let's go ahead, let's stand up, and let's change the cross of our legs. So other foot is forward, other foot's back. And again, as you do this, try to keep everything pointed forward, especially those hips. And whoop, I'm losing my balance. And we're gonna slowly drop down. Again, bending that front knee. I'm gonna change this angle just a little bit more so you can see more of my lower body. We're bending that front knee and dropping down. But the point here is we want the hip flexor to be what's feeling stretched. Now, again, you might feel this stretch in your quads on either leg. You might even feel it in the back of your leg. That's okay. The tighter you are, the more likely you're going to feel it in different areas. And again, we're going to hold it ideally 20 to 30 seconds. And we're going to all come back up together. All right, that was our hip flexor stretch. So that's one of the best stretches to directly hit the hip flexor. But I'm going to show you guys an alternative stretch, or a stretch you can do to supplement that, and that's a quadricep stretch. So if you've got something you can hold on to for a little bit of balance, I'm going to hold on to this. What you can do to stretch your quadriceps is basically take your back leg. I'm going to bend this down just a little bit so you can see me better. And we're going to just basically reach back and try to grab just above our ankle. And when we're doing this, we want to keep our knee pointed straight down to the ground. The other thing we want to do when we're doing a quadricep stretch is keep both of those hips pointed straight forward. And we want, again, if possible, have that knee pointed straight at the ground. It's great to hold on to something for a little bit of extra balance. And if we need to feel a little bit of a deeper stretch, we're going to just bring that heel towards our backside. And again, we're stretching here, the top of the thighs, but we're also stretching those hip flexors again. Let's go ahead and relax, shake that leg out, and go ahead and let's reach for the other side. Again, pointing the knee straight at the ground. And ideally, keeping both of your hips pointed straight forward when we do this. Again, it's great, especially if you're not doing this exercise a lot, to have something to hold on to for a little bit of extra balance. And typically for all these static stretches, 20 to 30 seconds is an ideal amount of time to hold it. And let's go ahead and relax, shake those legs out. All right, so we just did 2 good stretches for the lower body. We're gonna change things up a little bit, and we're gonna try 2 strength exercises for the lower body. The first one's the glute bridge. So this one's gonna be the hardest one for you guys to follow along with. So feel free if you wanna skip this one, but if you wanna join me, I'm gonna change the angle so you can actually see me. I gotta get down on the ground for this one. I apologize if the angle's not perfect. I got a little baby, so we have to share his play space with my workout space. All right, so I'm a little backlit, I apologize for that. But this is gonna be a glute bridge. So the glute bridge is a strength exercise that's specifically targeting the muscles on the back of the hips. It's a really, really good exercise for people who do a lot of sitting. So when you do this, the most important safety cue is that when we get in this position, we want to keep the weight on our shoulders. We don't want to have any weight on our head, but we want to make sure that our head is supported. So what this will look like, I'm going to lay back down, and right now I got everything on the ground. Let's see, you guys hopefully can see me. I got my feet on the ground, my knees are bent. I'm going to keep my hands down, and I'm going to activate my glutes, those muscles on the back of my hips. I'm going to squeeze them together, and I'm going to lift my hips up. And I'm going to hold that. When I'm in this position, from my knees to my shoulders should be a straight line. And we're going to drop down. So squeezing those glutes together, popping up to here, and back down. And normally, when we're teaching somebody to do this for the first time, we're just going to do 10 repetitions of that. And then we'll move on to another exercise. So if you jumped in and did that, feel free to do the rest of your 10 repetitions, but I know a lot of folks may not have actually popped down, and that's okay. So that's a great example of an exercise for that stage 3, the actual activating the muscle. Now for this one, I'm also going to show you guys one exercise that's kind of moving away from stage 3 and even into that stage 4, and that's the squat. So a squat, we're starting to get into that where we're actually integrating and learning to do the movement, but we're still going to be using those hip muscles. So probably a lot of you guys have done a squat before if you've ever taken a group X class, or but I just want to show you guys a couple important things from an exercise form standpoint. So when we're doing a squat, ideally, we really want to, again, if our purpose is to correct muscle imbalances, we really want to focus on good form. And for this purpose, we also really want to focus on activating the glutes, the muscles on the back of the hips. So we're going to start with our feet about shoulder width apart. And again, feel free to stand up and join me. We want everything facing forward, facing the same direction. And what we're going to do, we're going to sit down like we're sitting back into a chair. So for me, when I'm not using any weight, I like to have my arms out to help with balance. We're going to squat down as far as is comfortable. If you're able to stop when your thighs get parallel to the ground, that's great, and we're going to come back up. If you need to stop earlier than that, that's totally fine. But the one thing I really want you guys focusing on is squeezing those glutes, those muscles on the back of the hips. So let's try dropping down to our thighs being parallel to the ground, and then pushing back up, really squeezing those muscles on the back of the hips. So I'll invite you guys, go ahead, try a couple repetitions if you'd like. Most important, well, one of the important recommendations with this is when you're dropping down, that your knees are following your toes. So hopefully you guys aren't getting seasick from me moving my camera back and forth. But what that looks like, your knees, they're gonna follow the path of your toes. So right here, you can see my toes are pointed almost straight forward. And again, trying to keep those knees in that same alignment. Okay, so I'm working up a little bit of a sweat. All right, finish up those squats if you're doing them. We're gonna switch gears a little bit and do something a little bit easier, which we're gonna move to an upper cross syndrome. So what that looks like is upper cross syndrome is a combination of shoulders forward, head forward. Again, you kind of think about it as that position. If you spend too much time hunched over at a computer, you might start getting tight chest muscles, tight neck muscles, and then those opposite muscles might start to get weak. So we have 2 stretches for that. First stretch, you can do this standing or seated, whichever is more comfortable for you. I'm going to stay seated so you guys can see what the seated version looks like. Standing version is almost identical. What we'll do is we're basically just going to reach our arms behind our back. We'll bend that down a little bit. Reach our arms, clasp our hands together, and we're going to pull our shoulder blades back. You want to pull those shoulder blades back towards each other. You ideally want to also keep your shoulder blades down when you're doing this. And while you're pulling them together, you should be feeling a little bit of a stretch, either in your chest. That's the ideal place to be feeling this, but you might also feel it in your shoulders. So pull those arms, okay, clasp those fingers together, pull those arms back. And with all these static stretches, we want to be holding for 20 to 30 seconds. And again, we should be feeling this in the chest. And let's go ahead and relax. So shake those arms out a little bit. Now for this next one, this is just going to be a really easy neck stretch. So it's a really small movement, but it'll feel really good if you've been sitting at a computer, especially if you've been letting your head come forward. So what we'll do, make sure that you got your feet flat on the ground. All we're going to do is look straight up at the sky, or at the ceiling, unfortunately, here. So just go ahead and look straight up. Now don't go too far back. You just want to feel a light stretch in the front of your neck. Hopefully I'll look okay on camera like this. And you're basically just looking up at the ceiling. You want to feel a very light stretch. This is not a stretch you really want to force. And again, perfect roll, we'll hold it for 20 to 30 seconds. But let's come back down. So those were 2 stretches, great for the upper body. You can mix those into your day. Now we're going to give you guys 2 strength exercises from that activate standpoint. These ones are really low intensity. They're really just designed to start to activate those weak muscles, the opposite ones. So this first one is going to be for the back of the neck. And again, no equipment necessary. You can do both of these seated. So what this will look like, you're going to start normal forward position. And sometimes it helps to take 2 fingers, just kind of put them on your chin. But go ahead and kind of push your head forward. And then all you do, keep your hand where your hand is at and try pulling your head back, moving your chin away from your fingers. So it's a small movement. Head forward, and now pull your head back. It's a little hard to talk while doing this. Head forward, and head back. You should feel just a very small activation in the muscles of the back of your neck. Now it's, we're not bench pressing here. We're doing a very small movement, but what this is doing is it's activating these muscles, which might be a little weak if you're sitting at a computer for a long time. So go ahead, try finishing up about 10 to 15 repetitions of that. For most of these activation exercises, we recommend 10 to 15 repetitions. And then we're going to move down the body just a little bit to our upper back. And so what that's going to look like, let me move this just a little bit, is right now we're going to work on our shoulder blades. So if we are hunched over, if we ever have that kind of bad posture with our shoulders forward, all we're going to do is use the resistance from the muscles of our chest as the resistance for this exercise. So what I want you all to do is just really exaggerate pulling those shoulder blades forward. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, keeping our shoulder blades down, we're going to pull those shoulder blades back. Try to really pinch the shoulder blades together. So again, let them come forward, and now really keeping the shoulder blades down, really pull those shoulder blades back. You can do whatever you want with your arms. Relax them, have them up a little bit. Let's go forward and really pull them back. Try to pinch those shoulder blades. If you had like an apple and it was in between your shoulder blades, you're trying to crush that apple or crush a can if it was in between those shoulder blades. And come forward and back. It doesn't really matter how long you hold it for. Holding it for just a second or 2 is great. and then relax forward and pull them back. So if you've been doing this, go ahead, keep doing that at whatever pace is comfortable for you. Again, 10 to 15 repetitions of this is really great. And what you'll probably feel is in those little muscles of the upper back, you might start to feel a little bit of tension there, which is good because those are muscles we typically want to activate a little bit more than average. So what we just covered was, let's see, 4 total stretches, 4 total strength exercises that are really going to supplement anybody who's spending a lot of time sitting at a computer, especially if you're exhibiting either of those kind of muscle imbalance patterns. So I'm going to unpin myself, and we're going to take one short pause. I saw there were a couple questions that popped up. Looks like Bob answered those. So what we wanted to do is just take a moment to show everybody what a movement assessment looks like. This is something that personal trainers will do, which will help people dive a little bit deeper if this is something that you're like, man, I really wish I had a little bit more deep dive into this information. Bob's going to show you what that'll look like with me as the participant. And then what we'll do is we'll take a little bit of time at the very end to just answer any questions. So I'll kick that back over to Bob.
All right. So yeah, we want to basically take you through kind of my mindset of when I'm assessing a client and how I decide on what types of film rolling to use, what types of static stretches to use, and what types of activation and integrate exercises to use within their exercise program. So, you know, a lot of us, when we go to the gym or we sign up for personal training, we're all about, you know, we have some type of health goal, losing weight, gaining some type of performance. So it's still important to include these muscle imbalances that may be limiting your overall full potential within meeting those health goals. So what I do is I do these assessments, and I kind of incorporate them within that exercise program that I develop for those health goals, so that we're working on not only muscle imbalances, but the other health goals that you as well are trying to work on. So what we'll do is I'll have Chris get set up for basically an overhead squat. And this will be one part of an assessment that I do on top of many other assessments that we do, but this one is the specific one we do for muscle imbalances. And, you know, obviously it's an overhead squat. There's other types of assessments we can do, like a static assessment where I'm just looking at the individual. If the squat is too much, there's some modifications you can make. You can do a hands-on hip squat, or if you're comfortable, have something behind you like a chair. So that way that if you do kind of sit down in the chair, you still have your balance. So those are some modifications you can make. But when I'm instructing the clients, I basically say this next test is an overhead squat test. And what this does is allows me to see what muscles might be tight that need stretch and what muscles might be weak that need strengthening. So what I usually do is I instruct the client, in this case, Chris, about, you know, stance is about shoulder width apart. You know, have your balance kind of weight on your midfoot and heel. And then the client's hands are going to be overhead, so nice and high. Now, just doing that is actually an assessment I'm looking at. So if Chris or you have trouble getting your hands up to about your ear length, then we might have some muscle imbalances within the shoulder, elbow, or wrist. So those might be some things I address. But once we get them in this position, I say what we're going to do is just do nice and slow squats, maybe 3 or 4. And I say that I need to watch him from the front, and then I'm going to watch him from the side. So as he's squatting here, I can see from the front, you know, I'm looking at his knees, I'm looking at his feet. Obviously the camera is a little high, but that's okay. You can see, you know, what we'll do when he moves to the side, we'll see some muscle imbalances. So when he squats here from the side, I'm evaluating some things. I'm looking at that lumbopelvic hip region. I can see his arms falling forward. So right there, that tells me that, you know, he might have some tight soleus gastroc hip flexor muscles. You know, we might want to strengthen those glutes. Again, kind of what I alluded to earlier within my speech, those would be some things that I would incorporate within his exercise program to help, you know, help with those muscle imbalances and develop, you know, full potential within the kinetic chain of the human body. So, you know, people, when I do these tests, they actually really enjoy them because, you know, the whole purpose of the fitness assessment is I try to provide as much information as I can to that individual, to make them aware of what's going on, what I want to do, what I'm probably going to do. You know, I give them kind of a Snapchat of their exercise program and why we're incorporating this. So whenever you can tell the client why we're doing something, it kind of allows them to be more motivated and understand, you know, the exercises. And then, you know, that the main purpose is to be able to continue those exercises and work on consistency. So that's your main, you know, once we identify them, once we know what exercises to use, the next key factor is consistency. And slowly over time, you'll see those starting to improve. Again, you know, we've been sitting since, you know, we were probably we started working maybe in our late teens, early 20s. So, you know, some of us might have 30, 40 years of trying to combat these muscle imbalances. So it's not something that's going to be done overnight, but it is a slow progression, but you will start to see the benefits that come from them within a short time, and then eventually getting to that full range of motion. So again, that was just a quick overview of one aspect I do in a fitness assessment in regards to muscle imbalances. You know, as Chris said, we want to take kind of, you know, the rest of this time here to answer any questions you have. I know we got into some dynamic movements and stretches that might have been hard to see. So obviously, if you have any questions on those, please let us know. We'll be happy to answer those. And obviously, after the call as well, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're more than willing to help out with any questions you have. So, Chris, unless you have anything, we can.
Yeah, just real quick. Thanks, Bob. In the chat, we dropped 2 links. The first link is a link to our virtual programs page. If you want to check out any of the Group X classes that we have that are online, or if you're interested, we do offer, for at least the short time still, free virtual personal training. If you do want some one-on-one feedback, that's an option. And then Shani dropped a survey as well. So if you go to that survey, we would love to get some feedback. This is obviously a new presentation we crafted just for this kind of time period. So let us know if it's something that we could tweak. But yeah, that's what we've got for today. So Bob and I are going to hang on the line. If anyone does have any specific questions for us. And if not, thank you guys so much for everything you guys have been doing. I know this has been a rough couple of months, certainly a rough week. So we appreciate you guys taking a little bit of time to join us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Bob. This was great. I definitely felt some muscles. I'm like, oh my God, I need to stretch more for sure. So this is very, very appreciative. And